The moon refused to move that night. It hung there, large and heavy, like an unblinking eyes staring down on our village. The air was thick with silence, the kind that crawled under your skin and whispered that something was terribly wrong. Even the crickets, usually loud and carefree, had gone quiet. I remember standing outside my hut, clutching my younger sister's hand as we both stared at the glowing frozen orb in the sky. That was the night everything changed. Our village, nested between two hills, was known for its New Year traditions. Every year, we gathered at the central square to drum, dance, and pray for blessings. It was the one night when our differences were set aside and we became one under the open sky. But that year, the moon disrupted everything. The elders were the first to notice something was wrong. Baba Agada, the oldest man in the village, looked up at the sky and frowned deeply. "The moon is angry," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Others dismissed it as the rambling of an old man, but I saw the fear in his eyes, and then it began. It started with the children. One by one, they began speaking in voices that weren't theirs. My sister, barely 8, turned to me with wide, glassy eyes and said, "They are coming." Her voice was hollow, far too deep for a child her age. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who is coming?" I whispered, but she just pointed towards the forest at the edge of the village. A low, mournful hum began to rise from the trees, carrying with it a chilling breeze that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like voices, hundreds of them, singing a tune that didn't belong to this world. The elders called for the drums to be played, hoping to drown out the air melody. But the drummers' hands trembled too much to hold their sticks. And then we saw them, shadows. They slithered out from the forest, tall and thin, their movements unnatural, like they were being pulled by invincible strings. They had no faces, just dark voids where their eyes and mouths should have been. Yet, you could feel them watching, feel their hunger. Baba Agada shouted, "Don't look at them. Keep your eyes on the ground." But it was too late for some. A young man named Danjuma stood frozen, staring at one of the figures. The moment their shadowy hands touched his chest, he crumpled to the ground like a sack of yams. His body was still, but his eyes remained open, wild with terror. Panic spread like wildfire. People ran in every direction, some towards their homes, others to the shrine at the center of the village. My mother grabbed me and my sister, pulling us towards our huts. "Close the door. Don't let the light in," she shouted. Inside, we huddled together, listening to the chaos outside. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls. My sister clung to me, her tiny body trembling. They said they want the moon, she whispered. The moon? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They said it's their gateway. If we didn't give it back, they will take us instead. I didn't understand what she meant, but I knew one thing. The moon had to move. Baba Agada had always said that the moon was tied to our village's oldest ritual, one that hadn't been performed in decades. It was a dangerous ceremony, one that requires a sacrifice. The elders, desperate to save the village, decided to perform the ritual. Baba Agada led the way to the shrine, carrying an old rusted blade. My mother tried to stop him, tears streaming down her face. But he simply said, "This is the only way." At the shrine, the villagers gathered in a tight circle, their faces pale and their eyes darting to the shadows that loomed at the edge of the square. Baba Agada began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, his voice rising above the hum. The moon flickered as if unsure whether to obey or defy him. The shadows grew restless, closing in on us. I held my sister tightly, whispering prayers under my breath. Just as one of the figures reached for Baba Agada, the moon jerked in the sky. Slowly, it began to move, its light dimming as it resumed its journey across the heavens. The shadows froze, their faceless heads tilting upwards. One by one, they dissolved into the night, their eerie hum fading with them. The village was silent once more. Baba Agada collapsed at the shrine, the rusted blade falling from his hand. He was gone, his sacrifice sealing the ritual and saving us all. The next morning, the sun rose, but the village was never the same. Even now, years later, I can't look at the moon without remembering that night. The night it stood still and demanded its due.